So you want to be a dungeon master?
That's great. We're here to help. I'm Taylor.
I'm Justin. This week, we're talking about the divine, baby. Gods, goddesses, and all kinds of deities often have some sort of influence over the worlds we create or the ones we play in. But how can the dungeon master use them? Is there a right or wrong way to go about it? And if the gods are so goddamn powerful, why aren't they fixing the world's problems? There is a lot to discuss when it comes to how different pantheons are used in D&D, so let's get right into it. But first... As cleric main, Taylor, do you have a favorite deity from D&D? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
So yes, I do have a favorite deity. I'm not super big into knowledge and lore about all the D&D deities and stuff like that whole pantheon. I know the broad strokes, but I really don't know a whole lot of backstory into it. I prefer to pull from existing pantheons. Like I like using the Norse pantheon. Mm-hmm. We'll get into that more later when we go into setting up all the pantheons and stuff like that. But in the D&D sense, my favorite is probably Cord because it's one of the closest direct lines to Thor, which is one of my favorite Norse deities.
Yeah.
So it's he's the same kind of the god of strength and storms and stuff like that. So that's kind of one of my favorites as far as deities are concerned. And then, of course, I see it on here, but it's also my secondary deity because I'm a cleric and a paladin. So my secondary deity is the Raven Queen because just vibes. It's so cool.
Vibes. Yeah. Yeah, my favorite is the Raven Queen. As soon as I started hearing about her through, I think Critical Role was the first time I've heard of her. And now it's funny because now that Critical Role is stepping away from Wizards of the Coast and sort of, I mean, D&D as a system, even with their new systems coming out and shit. But now they refer to her as the Matron of Ravens. There's all these copyright reasons that they've stepped away.
Right.
Because they have a TV show now on Amazon. They have the cartoon. So they couldn't, for legal reasons, call her the Raven Queen. So they called her the Matron of Ravens. So all these little tiny changes here and there, which I respect. I get that, adding your own little tweak onto all this stuff. Because there are geez, man, if you go into just Forgotten Realms, not even other settings that D&D has fucked around with, like Greyhawk or whatever, I don't even know all of them. There's the Kryn world and stuff. There are too many. There are so many. Because then there's demigods and lesser gods and oh my goodness. There are gods I'm looking at a list right now on D&D Beyond, so this is pretty sanctioned as far as D&D lore goes.
Right.
There's the god of birth and renewal, the goddess of illusion, goddess of joy, goddess of pain, god of the hunt, god of thieves, goddess of forests. But then there's also 5 other gods of forests. There's 6 gods of storm if you're going and then there's gods of war and so many interconnecting stories. It's like Greek mythology where you find out that everybody was born out of somebody's head or is related to titans or some shit. It's just insane, all of this shit when it comes to the deities that exist in some of the lore out there. And then often even D&D will use existing historical pantheons, you brought up the Norse deities and stuff like that, but even again, this is on D&D Beyond, Celtic deities. They've used those too, Sylvanus, the god of nature and forests. Sylvanus is a big one. Yeah. In D&D, you hear about all the time. And then obviously there's Greek, there's Egyptian, there's Norse. It's presumably as long as it's not a current religion that people are still very much practicing in numbers, it's up for fair game is what it seems like. But Raven Queen is by far my favorite. I think it the motifs are so fun. The idea of using ravens and having this person in the story who, if you go by the lore of the Raven Queen, that they were mortal and ascended to godhood, which is such an interesting idea in and of itself. This idea of like, no, she's cool, but if anybody else tries to become a god, fuck them. They're getting too crazy. And I think that's really interesting. But also, like, this idea of she's essentially a goddess of death. Mm-hmm. But then I've also heard it described as, like, kind of more specifically the passing over from the living to the dead.
Like the guide.
Yeah, the guide. I've heard her be referred to similar to, like, the fates in both Norse and Greek mythology. This idea of, like, connecting threads and, like, observing fate and destiny and stuff like that. And I just use all of those motifs. I use the thread thing all the time. I've used ravens, just ravens feathers and all kinds of, you know. And then she's supposed to be connected to the Shadowfell in terms of, like, that's where she, I guess, lives or, like, mainly resides, or it's like part of her domain or something, like, because that's why she has a connection with Shatter Kai, which is a type of elf. And, like, so that's always a lot of fun to just have this goddess who's, like, on your side but also is, like, spooky.
Right. Yeah.
And I
spooky
like
vibes.
that.
I love spooky vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. So fun and interesting, and being, like, really mysterious. And, like, I don't know, imagine if you were a person who could see destiny and fate and stuff like that. And then it comes into question of, like, depending on how deep you want to get with stuff, is, like, can you change destiny? Is it preordained? How does that work in your setting or in your world? And I'm always leaning towards the idea of, like, you know, I think it's kind of like, this is what's supposed to happen, but also we can change things. But also we can fuck things up a little bit, and the Raven Queen can kind of be that final jury to be like, what if I change one thing out of motion and then butterfly effect this whole fucking thing?
Right.
Which is why she does some of the things she does in our campaign.
Just to kind of nudge things in how she wants it to play out.
Exactly. How she thinks things should turn out for the better. And also, I just find it to be super fascinating to have somebody straight up be a former mortal who became a god and then was like, no one else can do this though. And also, I hate people who fuck with, like, life or death. Being like, bitch, you did.
Only I can do that. Only I can do it.
It does, rules for thee and not for me. It does give that impression a lot. But I do like, it just seems like a fascinating character who has, like, these inherent flaws that are interesting to deal with. I mean, I lucked out, I feel like, as a DM, I lucked out by having a table full of PCs who all sort of, for the most part, worship some sort of higher power. Mm-hmm. It has made certain aspects of being a DM easier.
Yeah.
And really interesting and, like, fun to play around with. And, like, it's just this inherent relationship that the character has with this extra powerful being, and getting to explore what that's like. How does it manifest? And all these different things. So, like, I guess we should just get into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I do love some of these deities and stuff like that, though, too. They are so interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I am also a fan of how Critical Role has done it. This idea of, like, the betrayer gods. Like, they're not necessarily, like, devil lords and demon lords or whatever, like archdevils. It's like, no. There are straight up gods who should be in the upper planes, but they betrayed. And so they're either locked away or defeated or something like that. And having this whole backstory of, like, why the gods operate the way that they operate. Mm-hmm. Because in D&D 5th edition, it's easy when you're thinking mechanically speaking. Clerics are the thing you think of first, I would think, right?
Yeah.
Clerics get their god from their connection to a higher power. Mm-hmm. Like 99% of the time. I've talked about it in the past. I think you can run a cleric that isn't necessarily worshiping specifically like a deity. Maybe there's a different type of higher power that they can get magic from. It requires a little bit of work because they're getting their power from something.
Exactly.
But it's possible.
Yeah. And I mean, like, in Dimension 20, there's like a city cleric.
Yeah.
Who just worships the city.
Yeah. And gets his power from his relationship to New York City.
Right.
Which is the perfect example. But yeah, like paladins usually have a connection to a deity. Warlocks don't necessarily have a connection to a god or goddess specifically, but some sort of higher power, some sort of otherworldly being, I think is how the textbook calls it. But we're going to go over how to use deities from the Dungeon Master perspective, as well as how to create deities. Yeah,
because it's you can go either way. I'm always going to preach, use the resources that are out there already. If you're trying to not do a whole bunch of work for making pantheons and stuff like that, but definitely you can make some fun gods, because I mean, really, you can make them whatever you want, which is the cool part.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll have some quick tips for making your own pantheon even easier when you're using 5th edition as your system, at least.
Right.
But so we have these super powerful gods. They're they're doing all kinds of stuff. They're capable of a million different things. An easy thing to think about when you're using these deities is for world building. There's a bajillion different things you can do with these deities, with their influence, their power, their history, all kinds of shit.
Yeah, and it's really it's a really good way to, again, give that next level of immersion for your players, because you kind of can use the past of these gods and goddesses to affect the current way things are in the world. You can use that lore, that backstory of, okay, so this god, or this mortal ascended to being a god. Well, how did that affect where they came from? How did that affect, or how are they going to use that now, that mortal knowledge, that mortal life that they lived? How would that play out? And obviously we've talked about it a little bit, of like, the Raven Queen may be a god, but she hasn't always been a god, so she has that kind of free will aspect of things to be able to nudge stuff however she would like.
Yeah. I mean, that's an important thing to think about right there, is like, how are you going to role play these gods? Like, what are they like? Because it depends on like what sort of, I guess, inspiration you're drawing from. Obviously, it could be as simple as just binging it. You could just bing 5th edition gods from D&D, and you'll get a huge fucking list, and then it's like clickable Wikipedias, right? Where you could just click on, I don't know, I'm looking at Denier, god of writing. You could just click on that, and then it'll open up what their symbol is, what their clerics or acolytes are like, what their temples look like, and you can get a lot of shit from that, right? But you can also take what you like, ditch what you don't like.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, when I'm thinking of how I role play a deity, obviously there's a certain level of I don't know how else to phrase it other than like supremacy. Like, they're fucking gods.
Yeah.
So I'm almost always gonna do like a really powerful voice, like anytime Taylor's character Cal talks to Cord the Storm Lord, I'm always like, Kaladin, well done. Like, it's always
strong Mufasa in the Cloud vibes.
Yeah. It's as deep as I can physically go. But then also it's like, okay, are we talking gods in more of a like Judeo-Christian sense, where it's like they're untouchable? Like, this idea of like they're always thinking about the greater good. They're always like, it's like their plans are infallible. How dare you even question them?
Right.
Of course they know what's best and blah, blah, blah. Or are we going closer to like Greek mythology, where it's like, no, dude, they're like little kids with superpowers. Half of their shit is like petty, spiteful, lustful. You know what I'm saying? So it's like it kind of, and that's you could go all over the place with it.
That's a lot of the pantheons in like on our planet. Is a lot of them are like that, of just being just a bunch of little shits running around.
Yeah. So like that's the thing too, is like you could play, how you role play a deity can change, and you can come up with it yourself. You can use a lot of those things as like a working off point. Like for example, I have a player in an upcoming game who has a connection to Bahamut, one of the classics, one of the classic D&D gods. And it is Bahamut is often referred to as like the platinum dragon. It's supposed to be like the father of dragons or the grandfather of dragons or something like that. Like has his sister is Tiamat, the evil dragon god, and then you have the good dragon god, right?
Right.
You have both sides of the coin. And so looking up Bahamut, it's like law, justice, caring for the little guy, like all that kind of stuff. That he talks about forgiveness. Like bullet points. Right. And then from there, I just come up with the idea of like, yeah, he's going to be super fucking nice. And that's going to be like my main personality point as role playing as him. It's just the idea of being somebody who's just like that, like perfect dad figure who like will never get mad at you. The kind of dad who's like, listen, hey son, hey, you got to text me at 3 a.m. because you've been drinking underage, but hey, I'd rather you text me, no questions asked. I'm not going to bust your balls about it. I'd rather pick you up at 3 a.m. than you drive drunk, you know? Like that kind of dad. And so these are the things that I'm drawing on when I decide how I'm going to play Bahamut.
That's so great. Just tell me. I'm not going to be mad. I'm not going to be mad.
I'd rather you be safe. And so, yeah, just thinking about stuff like that. And then, like, there's so much world building you can do off of that. There's, like, really obvious ones, right? Like, for example, temples.
Right.
When you're doing world building, it makes sense for small towns to maybe have one temple. Because if you're playing D&D 5th edition, chances are gods and goddesses are going to come up, like, most of the time, right?
What?
Most of the time.
Yeah.
But like in my home game of Sphinx City, it doesn't come up at all. There isn't a single character who gives a shit about deities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I mean, the most we have is a warlock to Trinculo.
Of course. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it. There's like nothing else. No one gives a shit. I've had NPCs, but that's why as of the moment of recording this thing, I don't have a ton of temples in Sphinx City.
Yeah.
It makes
sense.
Yeah, if in the middle of the game someone was like, "Hey, are there temples?" I'd be like, "Of course there's temples. It's a huge, massive city. Like, of course there is." Because like, it's based on New York City loosely, right? So it's like New York City has a bunch of temples. They have cathedrals. Right. They have probably a temple to almost every religion.
Right.
So does
somewhere
Sphinx
in the city, right?
There's no reason for me to go into depth about where each temple is and what it looks like on the inside and all that kind of stuff because it doesn't come up in the game. So who cares? I don't need it until I need it. So I'll do it then. But if you're doing that traditional fantasy medieval shit, it's probably going to come up when it comes to world building. If it's my usual go-to is like if it's a small little tiny town, one temple. Big town, like Waterdeep or Yarder, multiple temples.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Even then, it's possible that not every single god and goddess has a temple, but that's why hopefully you find that stuff out about your players' characters beforehand.
Right. Or, and if you do have one specific deity in mind, and you can use it as a hook, a plot hook. Oh, hey, yeah, so there's no temple for this god here, but, you do find some rumors of a temple to that god, a couple towns over, and then that's, where the bandits are going to jump them, or whatever. It's a good way to drive the plot to where you want it to go. It's just another tool in the belt.
Yeah.
To pull your players along with.
Definitely. Absolutely. And then there's all kinds of events that you can do, both current and historical, based on the deities and stuff like that. Raven Queen, that example is easy because historically, normal elven woman rose to godhood. Incredible. Currently, how does that look? I bet that her hometown fucking tourists the shit out of that. I would. I think that's a funny idea right there.
It's just a little. This was the home of the Raven Queen, and it's literally like just the most barren. There's 4 pieces of furniture inside.
Yeah. It was kept exactly as it was before she rose to godhood.
Right.
It's like covered in dust. Everything is
and of course
nailed
there's
down.
there's the Raven Queen impersonator in the
my God,
the museum that's answering questions as the Raven Queen.
Mm-hmm. Little kids are trying to get her to break character.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So funny. So there's an idea right there. Or like, and some of the event ideas, it kind of depends on how deep you want to go with the lore surrounding your pantheons.
Right.
And stuff like that. Like, I have only gone as deep as the players seem to be into, but I've talked to other people who are like, man, they start building a world with the pantheon and the creation story of how the universe was created, and I'm like, dang, that's crazy. My players don't give a shit about how the earth was made. They just care that they get their spells in the morning.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a table for, there's always a table for everything, but like if you're gonna go that deep into the creation story of things, then you are gonna make it so that you're gonna basically force this godhood or god chasing quest or whatever. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is like a clash between gods, and then that's kind of what you build to for the whole campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because you have to ask yourself, or at least I always do. I always am asking myself when I'm thinking about deities and stuff like that is, why aren't they doing more?
Right.
Why give powers to a cleric if you could just do it yourself? Like, if it's that important, you know what I mean? If your super powerful Stormlord is reaching out to Kaladin the Mortal at level 2 and being like, you have to go do this mission. Like, at what point is it like, hey, dog, you're a god. You do it. What do you mean?
Yeah.
What if I fail? Like, that's the world ends because I, level 2 Kaladin, couldn't do it? What the fuck? Putting a lot of pressure on me, dude.
It's really, and honestly, I'm feeling kind of pressured right now. But I think a real quick and easy way around that is to make it so that the gods can't affect anything on the material plane, or can't directly affect it. Like they can't go up and pick up a rock. That's why they have clerics in the first place.
Exactly. That's usually the go-to. Mm-hmm. And then, same as everything else, you can go as in depth as you want. How did that happen? Was it always that way? Will it always be that way? Are there any exceptions to the rule?
Right.
Yeah, like,
and actually that was one of the kind of the plot points in my game that I was running was, there were these 2 gods that were fighting, but neither of them are allowed to affect the material plane because they made this promise a while back. Mm-hmm. And one of them breaks the promise and actually physically does something to affect the material plane, and now everything's kind of starting to shift and fall to pieces because they did that.
That'll happen.
Mm-hmm.
That'll happen sometimes. You hate to see it.
You do. You really do.
Yeah. Nothing worse than a promise breaker.
Especially for a god. It's supposed to be perfect.
For a god, dude. So what you're telling me is that your holy word means nothing. You fibber.
You fibbed.
You fibbed. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's always fun to have ideas like that, or like what they can influence versus what they can't. And to introduce all these different deities and stuff and have like some really fun temple ideas. I think I made up a temple one time. There's a D&D deity I never know how to pronounce her name. I always pronounce it Miliki, but it could be...
Oh, yeah.
It could be
different ways.
Maliki. I have no idea. Mielikki. So, something. Anyway, she's the goddess of forests. She's a nature domain deity, neutral good. My thing with her, I introduced a temple, and it was just it's super cheesy idea. It's just the opposite of Christmas, right?
Right.
Or no, it kind of plays into Christmas, actually. Just this idea of like, and when I say Christmas, I mean like the really commercial side of Christmas. Like you go outside, you get a tree, bring tree inside. Crazy.
Bring outside inside. Then
bring outside inside.
And
then take your lights inside. Bring those outside.
Put those outside. Yeah, right.
Those outside. So just like that idea of just like nature on the inside. So then just, okay, you walk inside this chapel and all of the pews are like one piece of wood, like that has been grown in a very specific way. Because I've seen artwork like that where people do like tree art, you know, where they like control how a tree grows so that it makes a shape or something.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So now all the pews are made out of like a single tree. There's going to be like birds. It'll have like an artificial sun and all these different things just because I thought that was cool. Different temples can look like so many different things. I think most of the time we've been to temples of the Storm Lord. It's been like battle, like fighting pits or something like that.
Pretty
like,
much. Yeah. They're combat monks, every one of them.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot of that. I think we've been to all different kinds of temples, and then it's also really interesting to introduce like how there's one deity, but maybe people worship them differently. Like they worship different facets of them. You know, like
there could
be people go for it.
It's like if you've got especially with these two domain deities, like the one of like strength and storms, you know, you can have some people who are super dedicated to the strength part, which is what we've seen a lot of in these. But then, you know, you could also have like a seafaring people who worship the storm half of it. That, you know, as long as we keep Cord pleased, we won't get smashed to bits out in the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect example. So many different things. I think I did that once with Sunny, with our friend Megan's character, who worships Denier, who's like a god of, I don't know, books, god of writing, a knowledge domain, neutral good. Is most of the time people are worshiping him, they're also good. They're kind of fall into that line of just being like, yeah, knowledge is a good thing. We should share knowledge. That makes sense. Like, if I come up with an invention that helps people, I should share that knowledge so that it'll help even more people. But then there's also like, then the question of like, what about bad knowledge? What about knowledge that could help hurt people? You know what I mean? If somebody invents in D&D the atomic bomb, like, should we be telling everybody about how to make the atomic bomb so that everyone can make it? But then it leads to nuclear energy, and that's a good thing, right?
Right.
So then it like all these interesting discussions about knowledge and how that would look from different factions, even like evil factions who are like, no. We figured out how to make a pipe bomb and we're going to tell everybody. It's like, oh no, probably not the anarchist cookbook.
No, wait, stop.
Keep that to yourself.
Right.
Or like the people who are like, is it that if those people are bad, then is it also bad then to keep knowledge and like hoard it? You know, like who gets to decide what knowledge gets disseminated and what doesn't?
Right.
And so it opens up so many interesting questions and stuff. And that all of that only matters because it is something that character cares about. That character's whole shtick is gathering knowledge for this, you know, multinational library group. And so the question of, you know, knowledge is power. Who gets to wield that power? Who decides who gets to wield it? You know? Does she have any questions about that? Is there a way that I can sow distrust into Sunny against the very library organization that she pledges her life to?
Interesting.
Possibly. And then there's all kinds of NPCs. Obviously, if you're making temples and different locations, because we talked about like current events and historical events, fucking holidays. There's an easy thing. Festivals, different things like that can be dedicated to a deity who's important to that town or something like that. Or, and then, I mean, I have fun with stuff like that. So it's like if somebody was doing a little festival to the Storm Lord, what would that look like? Is it flying kites in a thunderstorm? That's an interesting idea. Kind of crazy. You know, like what is it? Is it just a fighting competition for that side of the thing? Or what kind of snacks would they serve? What kind of music do they? Is it just all that like kind of hardcore battle music? I have so much fun thinking of stuff like
Final
that.
Fantasy combat tracks the whole time. Those are their hymns.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah,
and then if you're going to be thinking about festivals, you're thinking about temples, you also can obviously throw in NPCs in there.
Yeah, I mean, who's going to be doing all this stuff, right?
Yeah, it's so easy. Yeah, just like the easy go-to for me at least is there's a head of a church, and then there's like the acolytes. Maybe you throw in a worshiper or two, like part of the congregation. You know, if for some reason the party wants to talk to somebody who isn't who goes to the church but isn't part of the church, you could always do that as well. But for me, the things that I like, anytime I'm introducing a temple or something like that, I have already thought of who runs it and then who's just below them.
Yeah, is it just a bunch of nameless Dougs? Just
pretty much. Pretty much. Maybe one of them has a name. That way, if somebody's like, I don't want to talk to the head guy, but I do want to talk to, can I just grab a random acolyte?
Right.
Then it's like, yeah, his name's Doug. Here he is. He wears this color.
But yeah, so I think one of the last things about the deities is like, as far as like their entity, their personage is like, where are they? Like, generally, they're not just walking around on the material plane. They're somewhere else.
Yes.
On some other existential plane of, like there's in D&D lore, there's the upper planes, there's the lower planes, the outer planes. Like there are a million different worlds that they could be in. So knowing where they're at, that's also something else to kind of think about as far as like, where are they going to be speaking to their followers from? Like, we use dream sequences a lot in our game. So like Cord generally appears in this giant storm plane where it's all cloudy and dark and raining and thunderstorms and stuff like that. Yeah. But, a light deity might show up in a place of like, you're walking on clouds in the sunlight above, everything type of deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always fun trying to think about what it would look like if you were to go talk to them. I know, like, going back to Denier, the god of writing, it's like a massive library. You're in this incredible library. I borrowed parts of it from Critical Role's explanation of a deity called the Knowing Mistress.
Okay.
That's what they call her now. I think it used to just be Ioun. Like the Ioun stones.
Yeah.
It was the goddess who's connected to that. But then with the copyright stuff, now it's just like the Knowing Mistress. But it was similar. I borrowed parts of it and so this idea of just it being like a very elaborate, beautiful, almost palace-like library. And then there's these strange little librarians who just kind of don't talk to anybody and just walk around. And then it's filled with books. As you go over and you grab a book, it just describes the life of a person.
Yeah.
And they're just like, these are the souls of people who have lived and died on the material plane. And all of their stories are told here at this library in the afterlife kind of thing, just because I think it's an interesting detail that I've stuck onto. But like, where is that library? I couldn't fucking tell you. I couldn't tell you what plane it's on. You know what I mean? Like, because it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if in this particular story we're going to spend time traveling to the gods' planes. So, like, I don't need to tell you exactly where Cord lives.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know which of the upper planes it's on, but it looks like storms. There's a lot of lightning there. And it's like, so it depends on your story, it depends on your table and like what your players are interested in and stuff like that will determine how in depth you should get.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't need to
you don't want to
figure out every single little connection to like which gods and goddesses is Cord allied with, or which ones does he hate, or this or that. It's like, if it comes up, I'll figure it out then.
Right. But that's not something that we're generally looking for as a table, so there's no real reason to write it. You know,
Yeah.
It really is one of those things where, you know, you'll generally find out within a couple of sessions, you know, if the cleric's going to be super down and heavy with their god, or if they're going to kind of just play it fast and loose type of deal. Because it all depends on what your players want to do. You don't want to sit there and harp on about how this god is involved with that god and this and that and the third. If your players are going on some kind of a, you know, like a quest to kill a dragon, like, you know, unless it's plot relevant, there's not really a whole lot of need to delve into it, unless, again, your players are into that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, if your players are into it, then you can make the gods have a bigger part to play. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the history of the gods, like maybe it's not the gods themselves getting more in depth, but maybe like the information about the gods, the lore becomes a bigger point.
Right.
You know? But like, yeah, it all depends. It's like, I think of gods after the fact. Like, I created Sphinx City first, mm-hmm. and then started thinking, like, as I'm homebrewing this thing, like, okay, what gods would fit here? What would they look like, you know? And then, so sort of backtracking, which is why, technically, he's a fiend, but that's why Rodney Mullen has a character, because it's like a modern city campaign, so skateboarding, presumably, is a thing. Why not have a higher power who is dedicated to skateboarding and like sort of that freedom mentality of like, fuck it, dude, just send it. And now there's a powerful otherworldly being who can do just that. So yeah, when it comes to like your world building, your story writing, your plot creation and stuff like that, a lot of that's going to come down to the players and how much they care about stuff like that. And you can just straight up ask them. When they come up with their backstories and they say, I'm connected to this deity, you can be like, hey, sick. Do you want to go in depth, or are you more looking for surface level?
Right.
And if they're a brand new player, you unfortunately, and then maybe not unfortunately, but like you might have to try some stuff out to find out where the limit is. You know?
Because sometimes you don't know. You know,
Yeah.
Sometimes your player's not really sure, and it's one of those things about D&D. That's kind of what you're there for, is to kind of feel out different things and see what sticks and what is kind of just leave that behind.
Yeah, you never know. You truly never know. It could go all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'd definitely be open to feedback and stuff like that, because it could be, there's a level of like, if you're the player, there's like an interesting level of like, I don't know, like being beholden to this being that is so much more powerful than you, but also depends on you. It's such an interesting relationship.
Yeah, because I mean, if they could, they would be doing it themselves, potentially, possibly.
You would imagine.
You know, you would think, right? Like
you would think. So then that's kind of a very loose, or not loose, but a sort of superficial way of looking at deities in the realm of some of the preparing world building and writing side of things. But now that we're like, let's say we're in the game, we're the DM, how do we use deities in relation to our PCs, to the party?
Well, it's kind of up to the party in a way for some things. You know, if you don't have any clerics or paladins or druids or whatever in your party, then deities might not come up a bunch.
Yeah,
just
super
for
true.
the sake of mechanically, there's no reason for them to.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe, and if it's something that really matters to you as the DM, you can always throw in an NPC.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've done that a billion times.
Yeah, but I mean,
just because it's not important to the party doesn't mean that there isn't still a part to play in the story.
For sure.
But you probably won't go into as much detail, and it won't be as like front of office, front facing or whatever. But like, it doesn't mean you have to throw out all of it.
Right. Yeah, I'm just talking kind of from a mechanical standpoint from the party.
No doubt.
If there's no deity being worshipped, they can choose to worship a deity, obviously, and then that would be one thing. But like, definitely there's still something to be said from the world building aspect. Don't lose that bit of world building just because your players don't worship a deity. The gods still play a huge role in the Forgotten Realms in general, and most D&D settings in general, just because it is such a good way to get lore out, to get different stories out, or quests and stuff like that. It's a very handy tool, regardless of whether or not your players are worshiping a god actively.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it always comes down to, I mean, I'll just ask players, no matter what their class is, Hey, are you interested in having any sort of connection with a deity or a higher power? If yes, let me know. If not, no worries. And that could change down the line, right?
Right.
That makes sense. That's easy to do. So it really is like such a good, for me, I think of deities as like one of the easiest ways to drive plot forward or story forward or stuff that. Just because it's like, hey man, you worship this guy and he's telling you gotta go left.
You gotta go look at this thing. You gotta
come
take a look at this.
It's just so interesting to me. But also, I'm also like, and this has come up a billion times, I'm such a big fan of dream sequences and nightmares and visions, prophecies, whatever the fuck.
Because you can just sit there and hold your players hostage and they have to listen to you.
Yeah, that is true. That is a less romantic way of looking at it, but it is true. Because sometimes
we're doing this cool scene
too. Sometimes I do like the player to participate slightly, whether that's just giving them some dice rolls to do while in the vision,
Right.
But yeah, sometimes it really is just, there's so many interesting ways to do it, to switch things up. Like sometimes Cal goes to where the Stormlord is, and it's all thunder and lightning and storms. Sometimes the Stormlord will send a representative in the form of a lightning elemental or a tornado with a face. And so that's fun for me to figure out the different ways that this would look. Because like we're all about flavor, so like when you cast a spell, how does your spell look different than if somebody else were to cast that spell who worshipped a different deity or something like that? Or like,
how does this particular god's power influence your magic, influence your character? How does it, there's a million different ways to flavor it,
Yeah. And then like, it depends on how you want to do this. I think this next tip is for slightly more advanced tables, but there's also the discussion of like, what if that PC starts doing things that are going against what that god believes in? Right. And this is also true. This would also apply to like warlocks. There's always a discussion of that. They break
their pact. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like even are approaching breaking the pact, all that kind of stuff. Because I think at more advanced tables, you could have a discussion of like even going so far as to like take away class abilities or take away spells. I've seen that done in the right table in the right circumstances where it is so cool story wise. It's so cool having there be like a session, because you don't have to do it too long, right? It could be like a session or two where that person just doesn't have spells. You know, the party loads them up with magic items to kind of give them something.
Right.
And then is like, just stay behind us, actually. And then, you know, coming on to the other side of that, they either get all of their stuff back. Maybe there's some kind of communication has been done, some kind of, whether it's an apology or something, who knows. Or maybe they change classes. Maybe that's a really interesting way to transition a player out of a class into a new class.
Mm-hmm. Or, you know, in my case, it's a multi-class. It was a multi-class thing. You know, there was a conversation that happened, and I actually wound up losing a level of cleric and gaining 2 levels of paladin.
Right. Yeah, crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
Because it's just fun.
Yeah, it's just fun. But it was an interesting thing because it was because Cord spoke to you and was very much like, I'm not passing you off.
Right.
I'm just willing to share.
Right, exactly.
Is kind of more what it was. Yeah, because sometimes, you know,
Cord and the Raven Queen are like aligned together in our world. I don't know if that's true for, you know, Forgotten Realms lore, but I know it's true for our home game.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, there's just so many interesting like conversations that can be had between the characters and gods, like the idea that you're actually speaking to a god, because that's the interesting thing about, you know, 90% of these like fantasy old school genre, like, you know, worlds, is that everyone knows the gods exist.
Right.
You know,
there's hundreds of people have actually spoken to literal deities.
Yeah. Like the fact that clerics exist is proof that gods exist, because they're getting their magic through that worship.
Right, exactly.
So, like, at best, atheists just are in denial, I guess.
I think the best you can do is agnostic in that world. I think that's as good as you're gonna get. You can't. I really don't think you could be atheist in that world unless, you know, you write it that way, obviously. But it's very difficult when things like clerics and paladins exist.
I know. That's what I'm thinking. It would only work in the sense of just straight up being in like denial
it's
like
it's just
you're
just
getting
David
your magic
Copperfield
from other stuff.
Shit, yeah.
How do I know that your magic is from the gods? How do I know that you're not secretly a wizard?
Yeah, I've seen wizards. I've seen sorcerers.
Right?
You know, I know what a sorcerer is. You're not gonna get me.
You're not gonna get me.
Nice, nice try, asshole.
Nice
try.
Then you
get me to believe in your god.
I'm pretty sure all the temples are in one global conspiracy, and the world is flat.
Yes. What was your name? Q?
Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
We're gonna get canceled. All right.
Idiots.
Yeah, so mechanically, there are a handful of spells and or feat class features that you can do that do relate to like gods directly. My personal favorite is divination, because that just basically like that spell is you can just ask a question to the DM, basically. Like you break the fourth wall and ask the DM, but really what it is you're asking your god for guidance. So it's like there's a whole ritual involved. It's like a big prayer thing. And this same kind of is for commune, is kind of the same kind of spell. It allows you to spend time with your deity. I think that's more of what it is. I honestly have not gotten high enough level for commune, so I haven't read the text in a while.
Yeah. I think the big difference is the number of questions.
Okay.
Because divination is one question, right?
One question, right.
Commune
but it
is
can
3.
be answered however, and then commune is 3, but they have to be yes or no.
Yeah. That can be answered with a yes or no question. And you receive a correct answer for which. But it also says straight up in the spell text for commune, divine beings aren't necessarily omniscient. So you might receive an unclear as an answer. So that's the other big difference. Like when you're going into D&D, gods and goddesses, They are not all powerful. They are not all knowing. They are not ever present, right?
Right.
So that's an important distinction when you're thinking about being the DM and role playing as all these different deities, and just knowing straight up that it's like they're not perfect. They don't know everything. So it's okay to have like so early on in the game and be like, can you kill the bad guy? Or something, you know, like it's okay to be like, I don't know, maybe. Or something like that.
It's because they're less these super almighty beings and more immortal superheroes, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them are, you know, like obviously the god of knowledge is going to know more about a lot of things than, you know, the god of strength. The god of strength is, you know, the himbo. He's just, hey, bro.
Exactly.
Gotta go get those gates.
The way that Brennan Lee Mulligan role played the dwarven god, like the reason he doesn't talk to his clerics as often is because he's just busy, because he's the god of like crafting.
Right.
So he's just like, he's busy. He's making shit. He's like creating stars for the galaxy. Like he just doesn't have as much time. So he doesn't talk as much. Like I thought that was such an interesting way of role playing that that relationship and stuff like that. So there's so many interesting ways to play with it, depending on who they're speaking to with the divination, the commune, and stuff like that. And then this is also another one of those scenarios where it could be helpful if you know you have a cleric in the group who's about to hit level 10 and they're about to get divine intervention, which the way that works, it's super specific to clerics. You have to be at least a level 10 cleric. And once per day, you get to try and appeal to your god to divinely intervene. You roll a percentile dice. If you roll your character level or lower, I think. I don't know if it's cleric level or character level.
I think it's cleric level or lower. So it wouldn't make sense for them to make it character level.
I agree with you. Yes, it is cleric level. Equal to or lower than your cleric level. Then the deity intervenes. The DM, now I'm reading straight off the thing. The DM chooses the nature of the intervention.
Yeah.
The effect of any cleric spell or domain spell would be appropriate. If your deity intervenes, you cannot use this feature again for 7 days. If it fails, you get to just, after a long rest, you could do it again. And then at level 20, it just automatically succeeds, which is wild. So those are like...
level 20 is wild.
Level 20 is wild. When it comes to divination, commune, divine intervention, even like wish, it kind of bubbled them all into the same thing. It's good to have conversations beforehand and be like, hey gang, straight up, I'm not going to allow X, Y, and Z.
Right.
You cannot kill the BBJ. That's just not going to happen. Unless you guys are done playing the campaign. If this is your weird way of telling me you guys you want out, then by all means, we can just end it here. But like otherwise, no.
I thought about it. No.
Yeah. So like, coming up.
Best
with
I can do is teleport you to him right now.
Right. Or like giving some examples of things you would allow, or even having the player be like, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of doing X, Y, and Z, and then you can have a little bit of a negotiation. Yeah. All right, how do you feel about this? Instead of them like straight up teleporting you to the BBG's castle, which is located in this like insane plane of existence or whatever it may be, how about they give you a means to get there when you're ready or something.
Right.
You know what I mean? So they'll give you a tuning fork so that you can cast plane shift and get there when you're ready to get there. But the god is also essentially telling you you're not ready to go there or something like that. A bunch of different ways you could sort of figure it out. Because I know Cal has divination and casts it not as often as he probably could.
I actually don't have it anymore. I don't have it anymore because I leveled down.
Yes. Yeah, lost some spell levels. The trouble of multiclassing. But eventually we'll probably get it again and cast it all the time. But like,
yeah, I do plan on next level is probably going to be to get that cleric level back because, well, it kind of depends. Story wise, it would make more sense for me to take my 3rd level in paladin and get my subclass.
Yeah, it could go either way. I don't think there's a wrong answer there.
Yeah,
but yeah, it really just comes down to like Taylor asking, what was the last thing you asked? I'm trying to think.
What was the last thing? It had to do with Sabbath's house. Something about.
Oh, was it that long ago in Pandemonium?
It was. Yeah, it was in Pandemonium, I think.
Interesting. It was either that or it might have been on the way to Nesme.
Yeah, that would make sense too. I do remember a just kind of offhanded, "Hey God, what is X, Y, and Z? What is X, Y, and Z?" Because it did kind of get to that point where it's like, okay, well, we've got the time. I can ritual cast this. I don't even have to spend a slot for it.
Right.
We're just gonna,
banging out. It might have been like a question about the ice wall or something like that.
Yeah.
Or maybe like about how much time you guys have to get to Nesme, like if it was a need. I can't remember specifically. But either way, I mean, I think it kind of depends. Sometimes I will take advantage of Taylor trying to come up with a question on the spot and be like, you worded that interestingly. The answer is yes. And it's like, oh, fuck, I meant to say this. So sometimes I'll be playful about it, but for the most part, yeah.
Yeah. It's a fun spell. It's a really fun spell.
Definitely. And divination, I mean, it says you can ask a single question concerning a specific goal, event, or activity to occur within 7 days. So it's like pretty specific. Now it does tell you the GM offers a truthful reply. So that's important. So you can't be a dick about it and be like, no, the bad guy's already dead. Don't be a dick. Tell the truth. But also, the reply could be a short phrase, a cryptic rhyme, or an omen. So you can have some fun with it, but it all depends on like. And I'm like a big fan of being like, you cast the spell, it's 4th level. I know it's a ritual, but like, also I know that Taylor doesn't abuse it. Like in theory, Taylor could have Cal casting this every single day, but he doesn't. And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm more willing to give like more legitimate answers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If genuinely Taylor, this is a warning as much as it is a tip. If Taylor was genuinely casting this every single day, like, okay, guys, we're going to fast forward travel. You've been there for 7 days. And Taylor was like, I'm going to cast divination 7 times. I'd be like, okay, by the end, an acorn falls on your head. What does that mean? I don't know. Stormlord looking down like, fucking figure it out, dude.
Yeah. And then another thing to think about too with this divination spell is the same thing as the commune thing. Deities don't necessarily know everything.
Right.
I know it says the DM, like this specifically singles out the DM and says the DM gives an answer, but that answer is still technically coming from the god themselves. So you can do with that as you will, that God might be blocked off, like their sight might be blocked or something like that. But then the deity could say something to that effect, like, I tried looking and my sight's blocked. I can't see that. I have no idea.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of deities and coming up with ideas and answers and stuff, let's touch briefly. We're not going to go into too much detail, but let's talk about creating a pantheon from scratch. And even that, I probably shouldn't have called it that, because you don't have to create one from scratch. Obviously, you can use a million different ones that exist, whether they're D&D specific ones, like the Raven Queen. You can use all the different historical ones, like Taylor mentioned, the Norse gods, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, whatever the hell. Or you can come up with some straight up out of your butt. Whatever works. Or you could do a combination. hey, that's weird. Thor is fighting Mercury, is fighting Zeus. Bananas. Why not? Let's do it. Let her rip.
Let her rip. There's Bahamut. Forget about it. Let's do it.
About it. Bahamut's here. There's so many different ways to go about this. And I've talked to different creators who do D&D and TTRPG stuff. And it seems to, honestly, it's as varied as it is as the tables are in terms of what works for different people.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Some people start with the creation story, start with deities, you know? At first, there was nothing. And on the second day, the lords created. Like, they're fucking, that's where they start.
Right.
And then I'm on the other side of things. Completely on the other side. I start with the setting, and I make gods to fit that setting. And then I sort of retro-engineer everything.
I like that better, in my opinion. And again, there's a table for everything. But my personal opinion is to start with the setting and then figure out how the gods fit into it. Rather than trying to go the other way around. Because, I mean, you can get into this. The biggest pitfall of it, in my mind, is if you spend a bunch of time into starting with the gods, and the gods created the world, and then the world aged for 4,000 years, and then, you know, now the gods are still here, and then this is the weird inner political stuff between the gods now that things have kind of been fleshed out or whatever. You know, you're either gonna have to force your players to follow these trains of thought, or you're gonna be writing it for nothing.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. There's a pretty high potential that certain things won't get used or won't be used as much, or at all. You never really know. So it's just like, for me, it really just comes down to, I just have never had a game, and this is also true for me personally. I also don't have players going super deep into history. Like, so I don't need to know about 7 generations ago what the fuck they were up to. Right? Like, I've played Sphinx City so much on camera, off camera, home games, actual plays. Who gives it? It hasn't come up, the specific founding of Sphinx City.
That's wild.
It just doesn't come up because it's like the players have to bring me there.
Exactly.
I'm not going to put all this time and effort into it if it's not important, and it hasn't been important to anybody. Because when you're fighting an evil pharmaceutical company, no part of you is like, well, I wonder
how this all
wonder
started.
why it's called Sphinx City. It's like, no, I wonder what the fuck this evil pharmaceutical company is up to. Like, we got bigger shit to fry, you know? And that's just my personal storytelling has always been like setting focused and not like history or religion focused.
Right.
It's probably why some people tell me that I shouldn't be using 5e to tell most of my stories, but like I like 5th edition as a game mechanic. But anyway, so I always start with setting, but I mean, I could see it being a cool experiment even for me to start with the deities.
Yeah. So if we are setting up a pantheon, how many?
Way more important to the story. If I was starting with deities, it's going to be way more worked into the world. But here's how I do it. Here's what I think is the easiest way. This is a good tip for new DMs, new world builders. I could see it also working really great for experienced game masters and DMs and stuff like that. Go over and just look at a list of all of the cleric domain subclasses. Yeah. And then open up the list of all the warlock otherworldly patrons. And that is all you need. And
Fair
then
enough.
Just come up with which one would be the trickery one. What if it's like the Queen of Raccoons, little tricksters?
Yeah.
Got it. Done. Yeah. What about the life one? I don't know. And then like I will base it on my setting and stuff like that, right? So like Sphinx City, thinking about a nature deity in Sphinx City. That's an interesting idea for me because it's such a big city. There isn't as much nature
Right.
as like out in the wilderness. So the things that have to live there have to be able to adapt. They have to be, comfortable around people and stuff like that, and sort of adapt their wild lifestyles to the hustle and bustle of a city. Maybe it could be something like, I can steal the idea from fucking Hey Arnold, and it's just the pigeon guy. Remember that guy?
Yeah.
The pigeon man? Mm-hmm. That's an interesting idea for a deity. Or maybe that's just his mortal like avatar.
Right.
He's the pigeon man, but in reality it's like something else.
He's a giant pigeon.
It could be. Or maybe it's a giant crocodile living in the middle of the sewers. Maybe it's the Basque mother.
Right.
Or, and you know what I mean? Then I'm bouncing ideas off of that. What does the war domain person look like in a big city like New York City?
Yeah.
And maybe it's more closely related to like pollution or traffic and technology and stuff like that, kind of harping on the fact that it's a modern setting. And so it's almost it's hard to get away from the idea of war when you're thinking of a modern setting without thinking of like firearms and shit. It's connected to that. Knowledge domain. Well, we have the public library is a big part of the Sphinx City setting, so maybe it has something to do with that. You know what I mean? So then that's how I'm doing it. Is I'm using the domains and sort of trying to match that domain. What does trickery look like in the city?
Right.
And sometimes they're just like silly little ideas, like the idea of the raccoon thing, but then let's build on it, and then sort of as we spider out on my like little notes, it starts getting more and more legit. Like what started as a dumb raccoons, haha, trickery, little bandits. Soon you have all this fucking potential lore about what they would be like.
Yeah.
And then you have it. That's what works for me. I think it's the easiest way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of doing things. And, there are, multi-domain gods too, so you don't necessarily even have to come up with every single domain has a god. You can come up with like, these two would make sense for this god. It would make sense to put life and nature together. So this is the god of light and nature. And then that way you can kind of bring your pantheon down a little bit, so it's less to have to remember.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great point. And sometimes you're just coming up with them as they come up, you know? I don't have an entire list, an entire pantheon for Sphinx City because it hasn't come up. People, you tell them a modern campaign and people aren't as interested in playing religious characters. It is an interesting thing that I have discovered. It comes up every once in a while, but not as often. No one's jumping at the chain trying to play a holy man when you tell them Sphinx City setting.
Right.
Usually
exactly.
Like, oh, all right. But then, so right now I only have a few deities kind of figured out. I have more warlock patrons figured out than I do actual deities.
What does that say about society?
People are ready to make a deal.
Making a deal. We love to make a deal. I don't want to worship something. Let's just make a deal.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Yeah.
But yeah. One of my favorite deities is Umberly. Have you heard of her?
The bitch queen?
She's often referred to as the bitch queen. She's like an evil sea goddess woman. But I think the thing I really love about her is just her command of the water. Her ability to use H2O to sort of help her out. And I sort of channel her whenever I start thinking about Big Tap.
There it is. All right, so that's all we can get into this time. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Soyouwannabeadm, or you can ask us a question at soyouwannabeadm@gmail.com. If you like the episode, don't forget to give us 5 stars and a review wherever you found us, and check out our Patreon and Twitch with the link in the description. Join us next time for more Dungeon Master tips and tricks.
Bye!
See you.
And now I have the honor of giving a shout out to the members of our Patreon gang. Lee, we can't wait to roll dice with you. Nub Muffins, may Paylor's light shine upon you. And there's Theo R, Vanessa D, Talk Screen, and Tappy. If you want a shout out, join the Adult or Ancient Dragon gangs on Patreon. Tune in next time for more tips and tricks from So You Wanna Be a DM.